The vast theater of global power, where nations rise and fall like tides, one country has silently nurtured a force so profound that it has left even the mightiest superpower in awe. India, often celebrated for its culture, history, and resilience, now reveals a hidden strength, its nuclear power. Visible. Like a predator concealed in the shadows, its presence is felt only when it chooses to emerge, shaking the very balance of the world order. And today we unravel that astonishing story. In the beginning, the story of India's nuclear journey was not marked by grandeur, bold announcements, or sweeping gestures of power, but rather by quiet steps taken in the background of a newly independent nation still finding its place in a divided world. Emerging from centuries of colonial subjugation, India understood that survival in the modern era would not depend solely on its sheer size or cultural heritage, but on its ability to wield strength in forms that others could not easily undermine. While the world's superpowers were locked in the theater of the Cold War, trading threats and demonstrating their nuclear arsenals with dramatic flair, India chose another path. It built its foundation in silence, away from the blinding spotlight of international attention, where strategies could be nurtured, technologies tested, and ideas transformed into capabilities without drawing the premature scrutiny of rivals. This quiet determination was born not out of ambition alone, but out of necessity. For India understood that its sovereignty could never be truly secure without a hidden shield to guard it from external pressures. The evolution of India's nuclear program did not follow the predictable trajectory of nations that paraded their advancements for recognition. Instead, it was a carefully measured progression, moving step by step, guided by both restraint and foresight. Scientists worked in laboratories that rarely made headlines, yet their work carried the weight of a nation's destiny. Each breakthrough in atomic research, every test in physics and engineering, every challenge surmounted in secrecy, represented more than scientific achievement. It was a declaration that India refused to remain vulnerable. These achievements were rarely publicized in their time, and often underestimated by global observers who assumed India lacked the resources or the will to pursue such a path. But beneath the quiet surface, a formidable undercurrent was forming, gathering momentum with each passing decade. This silent evolution was not merely technological, it was psychological. For a nation that had been dismissed and underestimated on the global stage, the nuclear program became a symbol of self-reliance, a demonstration of what could be achieved through perseverance even when the odds appeared insurmountable. Each advancement was wrapped in layers of secrecy, a deliberate shield against both external sabotage and internal doubt. There were no grand declarations of intent, only the steady hum of laboratories where brilliant minds worked tirelessly, driven by the vision of an India that would one day command respect, not because it demanded it, but because it had earned it. The silence surrounding this evolution also allowed India to observe and learn. While other nations rushed to display their arsenals, India studied the consequences of such exposure. It recognized the sanctions, the political isolation, the international mistrust that often accompanied open declarations of nuclear power. And so, instead of replicating those mistakes, it opted for a more strategic approach, crafting a program that was shielded from unnecessary confrontation while still progressing with determination. This calculated patience became India's greatest advantage, for it allowed the nation to move forward without attracting the kind of opposition that could have crippled its progress in the early stages. It is within this silence that India's nuclear journey took on a unique identity. Unlike the bluster and theatrics of other powers, India's path was marked by discipline, discretion, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Each move was deliberate, each success guarded, each advancement a secret step toward a greater future. The world, distracted by louder actors on the stage of global politics, failed to recognize the quiet rise of a nation building a shield strong enough to alter the balance of power. And when that strength finally revealed itself, it did not come as a gradual realization, but as a stunning revelation, one that forced even the most dominant nations to reconsider their assumptions about India's capabilities. Strategic secrecy is a weapon often more powerful than open displays of strength, for in silence lies the ability to confuse, to outmaneuver, and to surprise even the most watchful adversary. India understood this principle with remarkable clarity, shaping its nuclear program not as an overt declaration of power, but as a careful act of concealment, precision, and timing. While the world believed it was mapping the progress of every nation with meticulous detail, India was writing its own script behind closed doors, away from the headlines and outside the predictions of intelligence reports. The ability to mask its true progress was not born out of deception alone, but out of an acute awareness that premature exposure would invite crippling restrictions, sanctions, and obstacles from global powers determined to maintain their monopoly over nuclear strength. Thus, the art of secrecy became as important as the science of physics. The discipline of silence as crucial as the brilliance of innovation. As India's nuclear journey unfolded, global miscalculation played into its hands. For decades, the prevailing assumption in Western capitals was that India lacked the technological sophistication, the financial capability, or the organizational discipline to sustain a credible nuclear weapons program. This underestimation was not accidental. It was a byproduct of a worldview that often dismissed nations outside the Western Bloc as incapable of matching their technological advancements. Reports circulated with confident tones, claiming that India's nuclear efforts were limited to peaceful energy development, that its ambitions were small and its capacity constrained. Yet within the laboratories of Trombay and under the guidance of scientists whose vision extended far beyond the world's perception, a different reality was being written. Secrecy was woven into every layer of India's progress. Even as American satellites hovered above, scanning for signs of nuclear tests or construction, Indian scientists devised ways to operate under their gaze. Facilities were disguised as civilian projects, research papers couched in the language of peaceful development, and critical infrastructure quietly relocated away from prying eyes. The ability to cloak progress in the language of innocence was itself a remarkable act of strategy, for it allowed India to press forward with minimal confrontation, gaining time, resources, and space to strengthen its capabilities. Each successful evasion of external scrutiny was a victory in its own right, a step toward building not just weapons, but a national shield that was invisible until the moment it was revealed. This secrecy was not without cost. Scientists and leaders alike bore the immense burden of silence, carrying knowledge that could not be shared, achievements that could not be celebrated, progress that had to remain hidden. To dedicate one's life to such a cause required a discipline that transcended ambition. It demanded an unwavering belief in the greater good of the nation. While the world lauded the achievements of other nuclear powers in grand ceremonies and publicized demonstrations, India's architects of power labored in obscurity, their recognition deferred, their contributions hidden behind the veil of necessity. Yet it was precisely this restraint that enabled the nation to protect its most vital work from the disruptive forces of geopolitics. Global miscalculation deepened with every passing year. Analysts in Washington, London, and elsewhere continued to assure their leaders that India's nuclear ambitions were limited, that the nation lacked both the urgency and the capability to emerge as a genuine nuclear power. The irony was striking. The very underestimation that dismissed India became the shield that allowed it to continue its work. Each miscalculation by the outside world widened the gap between perception and reality, until the day came when the truth could no longer be concealed. When India eventually demonstrated its nuclear capability, the shock waves that reverberated across the globe were not just about the weapons themselves, but about the realization that years of confident analysis had been so profoundly mistaken. The story of strategic secrecy is also the story of India's patience. Unlike powers that rushed to flaunt their arsenals, India resisted the temptation of premature exposure, choosing instead to cultivate its strength until it was undeniable. This patience was itself a form of power, for it taught the world that true strength does not always roar in public. It can grow quietly, like roots spreading deep beneath the surface, unseen until the tree towers above all expectations. The miscalculation of others, combined with India's discipline of concealment, created a perfect storm, one that allowed a rising power to prepare in silence and emerge at a time of its own choosing, not dictated by external pressure, but by its own vision of destiny. The power of resilience and technological mastery is not forged in moments of comfort, but in the crucible of adversity, where every obstacle becomes both a test and a teacher. India's nuclear story is a testament to this truth, for the nation's journey was littered with challenges that would have broken the will of less determined powers. From economic constraints to international sanctions, from technological denials to political pressures, the road was never smooth. Yet with each barrier came an opportunity to innovate, to adapt, and to prove that no external force could dictate the limits of its ambition. The quiet determination that had already become a hallmark of the program now fused with resilience, transforming setbacks into stepping stones and difficulties into fuel for mastery. When the world closed its doors to India, denying access to advanced materials, critical technology, and global collaboration, it could have meant the end of a lesser effort. But in India's laboratories, this denial became the spark of self-reliance. Scientists and engineers, cut off from the conveniences of international partnerships, began to innovate with what they had, developing indigenous technologies, building systems from scratch, and learning to achieve with limited resources what others accomplished with abundance. Each breakthrough carried with it not just the satisfaction of achievement, but the deeper pride of independence, a declaration that India's progress was not borrowed, but built by its own hands. Resilience was no longer just an attitude, it became the engine of technological mastery. Every setback imposed by the outside world strengthened this engine further. Sanctions were meant to cripple, but they instead inspired creativity. Restrictions on nuclear material forced India to explore new methods of fuel production, pushing its scientists into uncharted territory where innovation was the only option. The denial of supercomputers for simulation led Indian engineers to develop their own systems, proving that brilliance can flourish even under the harshest limitations. What others intended as punishment became the training ground for mastery, forging a scientific community that was resourceful, inventive, and unafraid of challenges that would have seemed insurmountable. The resilience of this journey was not confined to the laboratories alone. Politically, India faced immense pressure to abandon or dilute its nuclear ambitions. The weight of international diplomacy bore down heavily, with threats of isolation and economic retaliation looming at every stage. Yet the leadership remained steadfast, understanding that sovereignty without security was an illusion. Behind closed doors, difficult choices were made, often at great cost, but always with the conviction that the price of vulnerability would be far greater than the sacrifices required to build strength. This unwavering political will, combined with the ingenuity of scientists, created a partnership between vision and execution, each side reinforcing the other in the face of mounting challenges. Technological mastery, however, is never achieved by necessity alone. It demands brilliance, discipline, and an uncompromising pursuit of excellence. In the corridors of India's nuclear establishments, some of the finest minds of the nation dedicated their lives to this pursuit. Their work was meticulous, their patience extraordinary, their vision unclouded by the distractions of fame or recognition. Step by step, they solved problems that others assumed unsolvable, designing systems that were efficient, reliable, and uniquely adapted to India's needs. This mastery was not an imitation of Western models, but an original creation, born of the soil and shaped by the spirit of a nation determined to stand tall. The resilience that drove this progress also shaped the character of the program itself. Unlike powers that showcased their capabilities with overt displays, India's strength lay in quiet confidence, the knowledge that true mastery requires no immediate validation. Each achievement was folded into the larger vision, each success seen not as an end, but as part of a continuum leading towards self-sufficiency and deterrence. In this way, resilience became not just a reaction to hardship, but a philosophy of progress, teaching the nation to endure, to innovate, and to rise above the expectations imposed upon it by the world. The fusion of resilience and technological mastery gave India something far greater than weapons. It gave the nation a sense of unshakable confidence. It proved that even in the face of relentless opposition, greatness can be forged when determination meets intellect, when necessity inspires invention, and when the human spirit refuses to be confined by imposed limits. And this was the quiet power that grew in India's heart, invisible to those who underestimated it, yet undeniable to those who would one day face its revelation. America's moment of disbelief and shock was not born in a single instant, but in the gradual realization that the narrative it had long embraced about India had crumbled before its eyes. For decades, the United States had viewed India through a particular lens, one tinted by assumptions of technological inferiority, political hesitancy, and economic limitation. Analysts and policymakers confidently argued that India's nuclear ambitions, if they existed at all, were modest and far from realization. This view was reinforced by intelligence estimates, diplomatic reassurances, and the comfortable belief that sanctions and restrictions had effectively contained any significant progress. Yet beneath that veneer of certainty, India had been quietly reshaping its destiny, moving steadily toward a moment that would force the world's most powerful nation to confront the limits of its own understanding. When India first demonstrated its nuclear capability, the reaction in Washington was not merely one of political dismay, but of profound astonishment. It was not simply that India had succeeded. It was that it had succeeded without America noticing the full extent of its progress. For a nation accustomed to seeing itself as the global sentinel, capable of predicting and preempting the ambitions of others, this was an unsettling revelation. The satellites, the intelligence networks, the diplomatic conversations that were supposed to keep America fully informed had all failed to capture the scope of India's achievement. What emerged instead was the realization that a country dismissed as incapable of sophisticated nuclear development had outmaneuvered the gaze of the most watchful power on Earth. In the corridors of power in Washington, disbelief quickly turned into urgent recalibration. How could a nation that had faced embargoes, technological denials, and diplomatic isolation achieve what so many had thought impossible? The answer lay in the very assumptions that America had held about India. By underestimating its resolve, dismissing its capabilities, and assuming its dependency on foreign support, the United States had blinded itself to the quiet determination unfolding thousands of miles away. The revelation was not only about India's strength, but about America's misjudgment, a humbling reminder that the world was not always as predictable as its analysts believed. Shock gave way to a deeper unease, for India's success carried implications far beyond the technical feat itself. It meant that the global balance of power had shifted in a way that could no longer be ignored. A nation once seen as peripheral in strategic terms had suddenly positioned itself as a formidable force, capable of altering calculations not just in South Asia, but across the globe. The image of India as a soft power rooted in culture, democracy, and economics now had to be reconciled with a harder reality. An India that possessed the ultimate deterrent, an India that could no longer be pressured, an India that commanded respect through strength as well as through values. For America, this was more than a strategic puzzle. It was a psychological jolt. The United States had long defined itself as the guardian of nuclear order, the arbiter of who could and could not possess such power. India's revelation challenged that authority in a manner that could not be easily dismissed. Here was a democracy, independent in its decisions, unaligned with rigid blocs, quietly demonstrating that the world's nuclear hierarchy was not as rigid as Washington had believed. This moment of shock was not only about India breaking through barriers, but about America confronting the reality that its influence was not absolute. The disbelief also resonated within the broader international community, many of whom had taken their cues from America's confidence. Allies who had trusted American assessments now saw that those evaluations had been flawed. Rivals who watched closely understood that if India could defy expectations, others might as well. The ripple effect of this revelation extended far beyond bilateral relations, shaking the assumptions on which decades of nuclear policy had been built. For America, it was a moment of reckoning, not just with India's newfound power, but with its own vulnerability to miscalculation. At the heart of America's shock was the recognition that India's path had been guided not by confrontation but by patience, resilience, and strategy. Unlike nations that announced their ambitions with fanfare, India had chosen discretion, allowing its progress to unfold in shadows until the day it stepped forward with undeniable evidence. This approach caught America off guard, for it was unused to dealing with adversaries or partners who mastered the art of concealment so completely. The revelation forced Washington to reconsider not only its view of India, but its understanding of how power itself can be cultivated quietly, methodically, and beyond the reach of prediction. How hidden strength changes global perception is a story that unfolds not with a single revelation, but with a slow and undeniable shift in how a nation is seen, valued, and respected on the world stage. For India, the emergence of its nuclear capability marked the crossing of a threshold, one that transformed its image from a country often relegated to the margins of strategic discussions into a central figure whose decisions could no longer be ignored. Until that moment, India had been celebrated for its culture, its democratic resilience, and its economic potential, but rarely was it acknowledged as a nation capable of altering the military balance of power. The unveiling of its hidden nuclear strength forced the world to reconsider these assumptions, to reimagine India not only as a partner of convenience, but as a force whose will and capability could shape global events. The transformation of perception began with disbelief. For decades, the narrative surrounding India was one of restraint, of a country too constrained by poverty and political complexity to pursue ambitions beyond its immediate developmental challenges. The revelation of nuclear capability shattered that narrative, proving that India had been quietly cultivating a different dimension of strength, one that defied the limitations imposed upon it by global opinion. Suddenly, policymakers, analysts, and leaders who had dismissed India's strategic role were compelled to view it in a new light, recognizing that beneath the surface of its democratic debates and economic struggles lay a nation of extraordinary determination and technological sophistication. This hidden strength altered the dynamics of respect. Nations that once spoke to India with the voice of authority now began to approach it with the language of caution and consideration. The very existence of a nuclear shield changed the way others engaged with it, for nuclear capability is not simply about weapons. It is about the psychological transformation of status. India was no longer a nation that could be pressured without consequence. It had entered the rarefied realm of those whose strength commands acknowledgement before any demand can be made. The hidden nature of its rise made this shift even more dramatic, for it exposed the blindness of those who had underestimated India and magnified the respect that followed its revelation. Perceptions also changed in the regional context. In South Asia, India's hidden strength redefined the balance of power, sending a clear signal to both friends and adversaries that its security could not be easily compromised. For rivals who had hoped to exploit India's vulnerabilities, the revelation was a sobering reminder that the nation was far stronger than they had believed. For neighbors who had often looked at India with skepticism or caution, it was a moment of recognition that its leadership in the region was underpinned not just by size or history, but by a formidable strategic capability. The very geography of power in Asia shifted, with India's nuclear strength serving as the axis around which new calculations had to be made. Beyond the region, the world's great powers were compelled to reevaluate the perception of India as merely a developing nation gave way to the recognition of India as a strategic equal, a player in the grand game of deterrence and diplomacy. Countries that had once sought to dictate terms now found themselves negotiating with a partner that could no longer be dismissed. The balance of dialogue shifted, and with it the tone of international engagement. India's voice in forums of global governance, once politely acknowledged, now carried the weight of a nation whose hidden strength had been unveiled, whose presence could no longer be minimized. The psychological effect of hidden strength is profound. Unlike open displays of power that invite constant challenge, hidden strength, when revealed, creates a shockwave of recalibration. It forces others to question what else they might have misjudged, what other capacities might be lying in wait, unseen yet undeniable. For India, this effect amplified its stature in ways that overt declarations never could. The very act of restraint, of waiting until the moment was right to unveil its capability, added to the mystique of its strength, casting it as a nation that not only possessed power but knew how to wield it with discipline and strategy. This shift in perception also carried symbolic weight. For the people of India, Long accustomed to being told what they could or could not achieve, the recognition of their nation as a nuclear power was more than a strategic milestone. It was a moment of pride, a collective realization that their country had defied the odds and commanded global attention on its own terms. For the rest of the world, it was a reminder that strength can be cultivated in silence, that a nation dismissed as secondary can rise to challenge the assumptions of the most powerful. Hidden strength, once revealed, does not merely alter calculations. It transforms identities, both for the nation that wields it and for those who must now reckon with its reality. The psychology of power and deterrence is not written only in the size of arsenals or the sophistication of technology, but in the perception of strength, the aura that surrounds a nation when it possesses the ability to alter the course of conflict without ever firing a shot. India's nuclear journey revealed this psychological dimension with clarity, for its hidden strength was never about the weapons themselves, but about the message they carried. Deterrence rests not in use, but in the fear of use, in the quiet understanding that a line exists which cannot be crossed without unimaginable consequences. This is the true essence of power in the nuclear age, where silence and restraint carry as much weight as action and declaration. For India, the pursuit of nuclear capability was rooted in the recognition that survival in a volatile world required more than diplomacy and economic progress. It required the establishment of a psychological shield, one that could dissuade adversaries from ever daring to test its vulnerabilities. Deterrence became the unspoken language of security, the invisible boundary that transformed India's position in global politics. The possession of nuclear strength did not need to be flaunted. Its very existence altered the calculations of those who might have otherwise been tempted to exploit weakness. In this way, deterrence became a quiet but powerful force, shaping the behavior of rivals without the need for confrontation. The psychology of deterrence also relies heavily on perception. A nation's ability to project credibility is as important as the weapons it possesses, for in the shadowy realm of nuclear strategy, doubt can be as dangerous as certainty. India's approach to deterrence was unique because it balanced secrecy with credibility, never indulging in reckless displays, yet ensuring that its capability was undeniable when revealed. This balance created a sense of caution among adversaries, forcing them to assume the worst even in the absence of constant demonstrations. By mastering this subtlety, India turned restraint into a form of strength, showing that power does not always roar, but often whispers in tones that demand respect. Psychological power also extends to the global stage, where nations constantly evaluate one another not only by what they possess, but by how they wield it. India's nuclear posture reflected a philosophy of responsibility, signaling that while it possessed the means of destruction, it would not wield it carelessly. This restraint reinforced the credibility of its deterrence, for it conveyed discipline, maturity, and control, qualities that reassured allies even as they warned adversaries. In a world often shaped by reckless threats and aggressive demonstrations, India's quiet confidence added a new dimension to the psychology of deterrence, one that combined strength with stability. The psychology of power is also deeply internal. For the people of India, the possession of nuclear capability reshaped their perception of their own nation. It was no longer simply a story of economic progress or cultural influence, but of sovereignty protected by the ultimate shield. This internal confidence radiated outward, reinforcing the belief that India was no longer a passive player, but an active shaper of global dynamics. The knowledge that the nation could defend itself against even the most formidable threats gave rise to a collective assurance, a sense of pride that transcended politics and became part of the national identity. In deterrence, timing is as crucial as capability. India's decision to reveal its nuclear strength at moments of its choosing amplified the psychological impact, demonstrating not just possession but control. To reveal too early would have weakened its strategic advantage. To delay too long might have risked vulnerability. By selecting its moments with precision, India ensured that its revelation struck with maximum effect, leaving adversaries stunned and allies recalibrating their assumptions. This mastery of timing was itself a psychological triumph, proving that deterrence is as much about when strength is shown as it is about what that strength consists of. At its core, the psychology of deterrence thrives on uncertainty. Rivals must always wonder about the extent of capability, the nature of strategy, the willingness to respond. By cultivating an aura of mystery around its nuclear posture, India ensured that no adversary could calculate with absolute certainty. For this uncertainty created hesitation, and hesitation became the very essence of security. In this way, deterrence was less about warheads and silos and more about the invisible influence they cast over the minds of those who contemplated aggression. The quiet but firm presence of power changed behaviors long before any conflict could begin. Lessons of patience, preparation, and timing are etched into the very fabric of India's nuclear story, for it was not a journey of sudden leaps or reckless ambition, but one marked by deliberate steps, measured choices, and an unyielding belief that strength must be cultivated with care. In a world that often rewards immediacy and spectacle, India chose a path of restraint, understanding that the power to endure is often greater than the power to act too soon. Each phase of its nuclear evolution carried with it the wisdom that haste could invite disaster, while patience could yield triumphs that endure for generations. This was not patience born of passivity, but of discipline, a conscious decision to wait until the time was right to reveal what had long been prepared in silence. Preparation formed the backbone of this philosophy. India's nuclear scientists, policymakers, and strategists knew that success would depend not on grand gestures, but on meticulous groundwork laid over decades. Research facilities expanded quietly. Data was gathered with precision, and systems were refined again and again until they reached reliability. This preparation was not just technical, it was also diplomatic, economic, and cultural. The nation needed to position itself in such a way that when the time came to reveal its capability, it would not be seen as reckless defiance, but as a rightful assertion of sovereignty. Every challenge encountered along the way became part of this preparation, strengthening the nation's resilience and sharpening its ability to withstand external pressures. Timing, however, was the most decisive lesson of all. In the delicate arena of nuclear politics, revealing strength too early can provoke overwhelming opposition, while waiting too long can invite vulnerability. India mastered the art of timing by carefully reading the global landscape, sensing moments when the balance of power, the distractions of other nations, or the shifts in international order allowed it to advance without crippling interference. When India chose to demonstrate its nuclear capability, it was not an impulsive act, but a calculated decision designed to maximize impact while minimizing risk. This mastery of timing amplified the shock felt by others, for it showed that India not only possessed strength, but knew precisely when to wield it. Patience also taught India the value of self-reliance. Deprived of access to advanced technology, critical resources, and global partnerships, the nation could have faltered under the weight of external restrictions. Instead, it used these constraints as opportunities to deepen its own capabilities, investing in domestic innovation and fostering a culture of problem-solving that could thrive without dependence on foreign support. The years spent waiting were not wasted. They were years of building, experimenting, failing, and trying again until the program stood on a foundation strong enough to withstand both technical challenges and political storms. This resilience was the fruit of preparation, cultivated patiently until it matured into undeniable strength. The lesson of patience extended beyond the laboratories and into the psychology of leadership. Political figures who could have chosen the path of easy concessions instead chose endurance, accepting short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term security. They understood that the nuclear journey was not about immediate validation, but about safeguarding the sovereignty of generations yet to come. This ability to look beyond the present moment, to plan not for applause but for permanence, became a defining trait of India's nuclear strategy. It was leadership that refused to be swayed by the temptations of haste, anchored instead in the steady rhythm of preparation and foresight. Timing also revealed itself in the way India balanced secrecy and revelation. Too much secrecy could have undermined credibility. Too much openness could have attracted dangerous opposition. By choosing carefully when and how to disclose its progress, India controlled the narrative, ensuring that its announcements resonated with strength rather than vulnerability. The timing of these revelations forced the world to pause, to reconsider assumptions, and to recognize that India was no longer a passive observer of global events, but an active participant shaping their outcome. Each revelation was a masterstroke of timing, calculated to achieve maximum strategic effect with minimal exposure to risk. The lessons of patience, preparation, and timing extend beyond the narrow confines of nuclear strategy. They speak to the broader truth that strength is not built in a day, nor is it revealed in haste. It is cultivated quietly, often unseen, through years of effort that may appear invisible to the outside world, but are essential to the moment of transformation. India's nuclear journey demonstrates that the greatest victories are often those that are prepared for, in silence, revealed in precision, and sustained through the discipline of patience. The hidden strength that stunned the world was not the product of sudden ambition, but the outcome of decades of preparation, nurtured by the steady hand of patience and revealed with the wisdom of perfect timing.